Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, July 3rd, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Ukraine's top general says that he needs more arms. So even though the US and its NATO allies have provided a massive amount of arms to Ukraine, the country's commander in chief has said that more is needed for Ukrainian forces to advance more rapidly in their counteroffensive. So, in an interview with the Washington Post that was published on Saturday, General Valery Zaluzhny said that he was frustrated because Ukraine's Western backers would never launch a major counteroffensive without air superiority, and he complained about the lack of modern fighter jets. Zaluzhny also said that Ukrainian forces should be able to fire as many artillery rounds as their enemy on the battlefield, but in some cases, Russia has fired 10 times as much artillery as Ukraine. So that's a pretty serious very disproportionate the amount of artillery ammunition that Ukraine has compares to Russia. Zaluzhny said that because of these reasons, Western comments about the counteroffensive being too slow really pisses me off, is how he put it. So, Western officials recently told CNN that the counteroffensive was not meeting expectations, and Zelensky has said that the assault was going slower than desired. So, Zaluzhny said, he told the Washington Post, quote, "This is not a show. It's not a show the whole world is watching and betting on or anything. Every day, every meter is given by blood. Without being fully supplied, these plans are not feasible at all, but they are being carried out. Yes, maybe not as fast as the participants in the show, the observers would like, but that is their problem," end quote. Zaluzhny said that he has been expressing his concerns to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, so that's his American counterpart. Zaluzhny said, quote, "We have an agreement 24/7. We're in touch. So sometimes I can call up and I say, if I don't get 100,000 shells in a week, 1,000 people will die," end quote. So Ukraine's main demand, according to Zaluzhny, is more ammunition, shells, and F-16 fighter jets. He thinks they're very important for their war effort. But those F-16s that have been promised for Ukraine, well, that President Biden signed off on the delivery of F-16s from third countries to Ukraine. They're not expected until at least the end of the year. That would be the earliest. I think it might, take even longer than that. Ukrainian pilots need to be trained, and Kiev has still not received a concrete pledge from any countries that say they're willing to provide the U.S. made jets. And regarding ammunition, the U.S. has been announcing all these weapons packages. They're sending them lots of stuff, but apparently it's not enough. And it's not clear if the U.S. and NATO policy of providing Ukraine with artillery rounds for this war is sustainable. It's not clear how long they can really do this for. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, he said earlier this year that Ukraine is using significantly more rounds than the entire alliance can produce. So Zaluzhny also discussed Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin's short-lived uprising in Russia, saying that the Wagner fighters withdrew from Bakhmut months ago, so it did not impact the counteroffensive. He said, quote, "We didn't feel that their defense got weaker somewhere or anything," end quote. So saying that the Wagner, uprising did not impact the counteroffensive at all. So we know in the months leading up to Ukraine's counteroffensive, the Discord leaks and media reports have shown that the Biden administration did not expect Ukraine to be able to regain significant territory. But the administration still pushed for this assault, still say publicly, oh, they have enough to, regain territory. When it sounds like Zaluzhny has been telling Milley this whole time, no, we don't have enough. We can't break through. It just goes to show that the U.S. really doesn't care about Ukrainian lives. They're very expendable for them. I think it's very clear now that the U.S. policy for this war, they want to prolong it in an attempt to weaken Russia, like Lloyd Austin said, at the beginning of it. because we know Blinken himself has come out and say they reject the idea of a ceasefire, a pause in fighting. They want this thing to keep going, even though they don't think Ukraine can really gain much territory. So it's just an funding an open-ended conflict. That's the policy. All right. The next one here, U.S. close to providing Ukraine with widely banned cluster bombs. So the U.S. is moving closer to sending widely banned cluster bombs to Ukraine as the Biden administration is pushing Congress to put aside concerns about the harm that the munitions cause to civilians. So the Washington Post reported that senior Biden administration officials have recently contacted Congress to make the case that cluster munitions are needed on the battlefield in Ukraine. So this was done by John Feiner, who's the Deputy National Security Advisor. He contacted members of Congress to gauge how they felt about sending the bombs. U.S. officials said that the White House was previously opposed to sending cluster bombs to Ukraine, but is now reviewing their position. The State Department was also opposed to the idea, but Secretary of State Antony Blinken has withdrawn his objection. Last week, a Pentagon official told Congress that cluster munitions would be useful for Ukraine on the battlefield. That was publicly. That was Laura Cooper. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. So cluster bombs scatter small submunitions over large areas, making them especially hazardous to civilians who can find them years after they were dropped. Cluster munitions and other unexploded American bombs have killed and maimed civilians in Vietnam and Laos for decades after the war. I know the U.S. dropped all sorts of, bombs on Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, but cluster bombs were a big one. They dropped millions and millions of them, and a lot of times, people have come across them and died as a result of finding them years later. I know in Vietnam, it's 3,500 people died. Have been killed by unexploded bombs since the war ended in 1975. And again, that's all sorts of bombs, not just the cluster bombs, but they're a big part of it. So they're a big problem. And because of their indiscriminate nature, cluster munitions have been banned by more than 100 nations. The U.S., Ukraine, and Russia are not parties to this treaty, which is known as the Convention on Cluster Munitions. All right, so the next one here, Ukrainian forces are using outlawed mines. This one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute, and it's about another weapon that can really harm civilians. So Human Rights Watch found that Ukrainian troops have been using scatter mines. The anti-personnel weapons are internationally banned, including by Ukraine, because of their devastating impact on civilians. Human Rights Watch reports uncovered several instances where Ukraine used anti-personnel scatter mines. The Human Rights Monitoring Group first made the allegation in a January report, but a press release issued on Friday says more evidence was found recently. And I know last year, a journalist named Eva Bartlett was in Donetsk and saw these mines. They're called petal or butterfly mines. And she documented that they were dropped on, populated areas of Donetsk, civilian populated areas of Donetsk. And this evidence that Human Rights Watch has found shows that Ukrainian forces fired rockets carrying thousands of PFM-1 anti-personnel mines, which are also called petal or butterfly mines. The submunitions are pressure activated, meaning that they linger on the ground until someone steps or drives upon them. So if you look at them, because the way they're designed, they can be dropped from the sky and they kind of float down, which is why they're called butterfly or petal mines. And then they land usually without exploding, and then someone can step on them. And they're very small and very dangerous to civilians. So Human Rights Watch verified 11 civilian casualties from the mines, including one death and multiple amputations of lower legs based on interviews with victims and their families. Russia has also used anti-personnel weapons. However, unlike Moscow, Kiev has ratified an international treaty outlawing their use. The Ukrainian government responded to the HRW report by saying it will study the claims, but maintains Kiev has a right to defense. All right. So the next one here, NATO to pledge future membership to Ukraine, but no timeline. This is another article from Kyle. This is just, more about this upcoming Vilnius summit. Washington expects Kiev will receive a stronger commitment from the North Atlantic Alliance at an upcoming summit. And a U.S. official told this to reporters on Thursday. This was last week. And this is Julianne Smith. She's the U.S. ambassador to NATO. She said, quote, most of us feel confident that we are going to be able to come up with an agreement that will reflect where we are and that the Ukrainians will believe and feel is something above and beyond restating Bucharest, end quote. So the Bucharest summit in 2008, that was when NATO first promised Ukraine that they would eventually join the alliance, but they haven't gotten a timeline. And that's kind of, Ukrainian officials are still kind of demanding that ahead of this summit that's going to be held on July 11th and 12th, even though the vast majority of NATO members seem to agree that Ukraine cannot join the alliance now and don't want to give them, any kind of timeline. But we'll see something at that summit. NATO will try to, placate Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials who are asking for this. And whatever it will be, it's going to be a big message to Russia that, this NATO-Ukraine partnership, they have big plans for years and years to come. All right. And I know the big plan is the Israel model. And this next story is about Israel's military aid. So Israel is to get new F-35 fighter jets financed by the U.S. So the Israeli Defense Ministry said Sunday that Israel will acquire a third fleet of Lockheed Martin-made F-35 fighter jets using U.S. military aid funds. So the deal for 25 F-35 fighter jets is estimated to cost about $3 billion and will be purchased through Foreign Military Financing, FMF, and that is a State Department program that gives foreign governments money to buy U.S. weapons. And the Israeli arms industry is also going to benefit from the deal. The Israeli Defense Ministry said that as part of the agreement, Lockheed Martin committed to involving Israeli defense industries in the production of aircraft components sold. So the Israeli Defense Ministry said, quote, this new agreement will ensure the continuation of cooperation between American companies and Israeli defense industries in the production of aircraft parts, end quote. So the U.S. and Israel signed a memorandum of understanding in 2016 during the Obama administration that gives Israel $33 billion in this foreign military financing and $5 billion in aid for missile defense systems over 10 years. So this MOU covers fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2028, and it gives Israel $3.8 billion in military aid annually. So, when they say the Israel model, I guess they're looking to sign some sort of long-term agreement to give them, X amount of aid each year. I think that's something that we might see. So in 2022, Israel got an extra $1 billion in military aid from the U.S. to go toward its Iron Dome missile defense system. So that was 2022. So that means they got $4.8 billion that year. And the reason why they got that was because in May 2021, there was a big bombing campaign in Gaza, and it killed at least 256 Palestinians, including 67 children. It was a pretty bad one. And after that, Israel asked for the extra billion, and they got it. So, that's what the U.S. rewards Israel for bombing Gaza. Yeah, it's amazing how much these F-35 fighter jets cost. $3 billion for 25 of them. And that'll give Israel 75 in total F-35s. All right, the next one here, Israeli airstrikes target the Syrian city of Homs. So we'll get an idea of what the Israelis will be doing with these F-35s. So Israeli airstrikes targeted Syria early Sunday morning. This was reported by Syria's state news agency. A military source said that at around 12:20 a.m., the Israelis carried out an air aggression from the direction northeast of Beirut, targeting some points in the vicinity in the city of Homs. So the report said that Syrian air defenses responded and the strikes only caused material damage. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights claimed that one member of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was killed, but that claim has not been confirmed. And, if an IRGC member is killed, Iran will confirm it publicly because that's a big deal for them. It very rarely happens in these Israeli airstrikes, but it did happen earlier this year. 2 of them were killed by Israel. And, Israel's always claiming that these strikes are against, Iran, but they usually kill or injure Syrian soldiers or Syrian civilians. So a Syrian air defense missile that was launched in response to the attacks was launched into Israel and exploded in midair. Reports from Israel said that shrapnel from the missile landed in the Israeli city of Rahat, causing minor damage to buildings but no injuries. The Israeli military announced that it launched strikes at a Syrian air defense battery after the Syrian missile shrapnel landed in Rahat. So the Israeli military announced kind of the strikes that came after that shrapnel landed in Israel, but they did not announce the initial airstrike because Israel just rarely acknowledges individual airstrikes in Syria. So according to the Cradle's count, the airstrikes in Homs marked the 19th time that Israel bombed Syria this year. In May, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that the Israeli government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doubled airstrikes in Syria since it came into power at the end of December 2022. All right, so the next one here, Israel backs down on threats to bomb Iranian nuclear sites. So this article is from the Cradle, and it says Israel is not planning to attack Iran's nuclear sites, and this comes from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's national security advisor. He said this on June 30th as indirect talks between Tehran and Washington regarding the nuclear issue have continued in recent weeks. So asked whether an Israeli decision on a preemptive strike against Iran was any closer, Sashi Hanagbi said, quote, "We are not getting closer because the Iranians have stopped. For a while now, they are not enriching uranium to the level that, in our view, is the red line. But it can happen, so we are preparing for the moment," end quote. So that does sound like a significant, backing down just in rhetoric. They're saying that Iran has stopped. They haven't changed anything recently. They have been cooperating more with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy, the nuclear watchdog of the UN, but they're still enriching uranium at 60%. And what the red line for Israel is if they try to enrich at 90%. But, this is just, again, they've been talking about threatening to bomb Iran for a while now over its nuclear program. And that, Iran maintains that they're not trying to build a nuclear weapon. There's no indications that they've changed their longstanding policy of not wanting weapons of mass destruction. So that's where we're at now. And then when it comes to the talks between the U.S. and Iran, I mean, we keep seeing these reports that they've been in indirect talks, and there might be a small, what Netanyahu calls a mini agreement, but we still haven't seen anything. So I don't know if that's really anything's going to really come to fruition there, but we will see. All right, the next one here, U.S. B-52 bombers fly to the Korean Peninsula. So U.S. nuclear-capable B-52 bombers flew to the Korean Peninsula on Friday in the latest U.S. provocation against North Korea. The South Korean Defense Ministry and the U.S. military said that the bombers participated in exercises and were joined by U.S. and South Korean fighter jets. The U.S. started sending bombers back to the Korean Peninsula last year when two U.S. B-1B bombers made the trip for the first time since 2017. And now U.S. bomber flights to the peninsula are a regular occurrence as tensions between Seoul and Pyongyang are soaring. So according to Air and Space Forces magazine, Friday's B-52 deployment marked the seventh time in the last 6 months that B-52s or B-1s have flown above or near the Korean Peninsula. So it's a big change from not sending them, for a few years. As we know, the U.S. is planning to dock a nuclear-armed submarine in South Korea for the first time since 1981, and it'll be the first time since 91. That's when the U.S. pulled its nukes out of South Korea, but it'll be the first time since then that U.S. nuclear weapons are in South Korea that we know about. But it's not clear when that's going to happen. That's something that President Biden and South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol announced in April. Again, it's not clear when this submarine is going to show up. Recently, a nuclear-powered submarine was there that's armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles, but not, nuclear-armed. And, because of the nature of U.S. nuclear armed submarines, they could be anywhere in the world at any time, which means they could be near the Korean Peninsula. They also have very long range missiles. So there's no strategic value to docking it in South Korea, except for, if you want to, it's just a provocation. That's all it is for the sake of it. So in another sign that, tensions are soaring between the North and the South, Yoon, the South Korean president, on Sunday said that South Korea's unification ministry should take a harder line toward Pyongyang. So, when Yoon came in last year, he vowed to take a harder line on North Korea. His predecessor, Moon Jae-in, was a big proponent of, unification. And he was talking to the North. It did kind of, the things did kind of fizzle out. But, this is a much different approach, and it's just going to keep tensions high. I mean, South Korea's new unification minister said in a 2019 op-ed that unification can only happen once North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's regime is overthrown and North Korea is liberated. So that's the rhetoric from this guy who Yoon just appointed a few days ago as the unification minister. So, there's just no sign. The only way things would change is if the Biden administration decides to back down. Not back down, but you know what I mean? Just ease tensions. Just stop sending bombers for the sake of it. Don't send a nuclear armed submarine. But they're not going to do that because this is all about their strategy against China as well, building up, just flexing their muscles close to China. All right, the last one here is an article from The Guardian. 80 Afghan civilians may have been killed by the British SAS. So 80 Afghans may have been the victim of summary killings by 3 separate British SAS units operating in the country between 2010 and 2013. Lawyers representing the bereaved families have told a public inquiry. One of the elite soldiers is believed to have personally killed 35 Afghans on a single 6-month tour of duty as part of an alleged policy to terminate all fighting age males in homes raided, regardless of the threat they posed. Afghans were often killed after allegedly producing weapons when separated from their wider family by SAS soldiers, but there were 5 incidents where the number shot dead exceeded the number of weapons found. So the fresh claims are cited in a document submitted by the law firm Lay Day based on previous Ministry of Defense court disclosures to a new public inquiry into allegations of war crimes committed by SAS soldiers in Afghanistan. It highlights concerns made by senior Army officers in emails from the time, including a warning that there appears to be a casual disregard for life. So we'll see how this plays out, this investigation. And, these are the countries lecturing Russia about, invading a sovereign country. Then, they're going around when they were in Afghanistan and just murdering civilians. But that is it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Daniel Larison. Mr. X would not approve of China's containment. And he's talking about George Kennan, who was the diplomat that came up with the containment strategy during the Cold War. He wrote, I think he wrote the article. It was either Foreign Affairs. I think it was in Foreign Affairs as Mr. X, outlining this containment of the Soviet Union. One from Ted Snyder, is the U.S. taking advantage of the Prigozhin coup? One from Ryan McMacken, Daniel Ellsberg was right, so are Assange and Snowden. That's over at the Mises Institute. One from Gavin Hamrick, the first Twitter war. That's over at the American Conservative. And our spotlight from John J. Mearsheimer, The Darkness Ahead, Where the Ukraine War is Headed. That's at his Substack. But that is it for today. I hope everyone had a good weekend. You could always support us at antiwar.com/donate. Like and subscribe on YouTube and comment. I appreciate all the comments and engagement. Follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at the Camp Dave. You can follow antiwar.com at antiwarcom. There's no dot in there. All that stuff is great. So anyway, I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll be back with more news then. Thanks for listening.